It's Fill Your Plate Now, where every bite brings you closer to the farm gate and further from what's unhealthy. Now here's your hosts, Julie and Tammy, helping you live well by filling your plate well.
So Tammy, how much did it take for you to fill up your car this week?
Well, you know what? Gas prices have been skyrocketing, so I think it was almost $80.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
a lot. And my car doesn't hold that much gas, 16 gallons. So,
Oh, really?
yes. So,
Yours is an older model Mercedes.
yeah,
Isn't it?
it is. It's a 2011, and I hate to part with it. I'm not good at buying new cars, so I just stick with it until they die.
There you go. Well, we have been experiencing some things at the pump, but so certainly have our farmers and, in your case, the dairymen.
I know the economy seems to be going up and down, and all kinds of peaks and valleys that we're seeing right now, especially in the farm economy.
Yeah.
So I'm excited we have an economist on today.
Yes, I thought we would bring another economist on, Danny Munch from the American Farm Bureau Federation, and he is one of their key core economists. And Danny, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy and Julie, for having me on.
So I'm going to give a little intro, but I'm going to also let you tell us about yourself. So you were born and raised in is it Lyme, Connecticut?
Yep, just like that's where the disease was discovered, Lyme disease. So that's where I grew up.
But I have to add this then, a shoreline New England town. Is it lovely?
I loved growing up there. We were only about 20 minutes from the beach. I lifeguarded through high school, and it was a great little place to, eat seafood and grow up as a kid.
That's cool. Well, you were active in 4-H growing up and deeply involved in Northeast agriculture. You graduated from the University of Connecticut with a double major in livestock management and policy and resource economics, hence the reason American Farm Bureau needed you. Following graduation, you worked on Capitol Hill in the U.S. House of Representatives, conducting agricultural policy research for Connecticut's 2nd Congressional District. And then in 2020, you earned a Master's of Science in Agricultural and Food Economics from Cornell University. So you did a deep dive in economics, and now you're with American Farm Bureau Federation. And are you, what do they call you, economist for policy, or what's your official title?
Yeah, so official title is an economist for the American Farm Bureau, but we're advocacy economists, right? So we're doing all the front lines numbers that the organization needs, supporting our lobbyists. We're doing a lot of the media interviews like we're doing here today. Um, any sort of interactions with our members, updating them on market conditions, going around the country, showing them all the information and data that we analyze, and also looking at what's going through Congress, analyzing legislation, seeing how it positively or negatively impacts our farmers and ranchers, and how that aligns with our Farm Bureau policy. So really cool job to be able to use numbers and take complex situations and complex issues and boil them down into easy to understand charts and statistics.
And hence one of the reasons why I ask him, because I've already had him do one of our articles for Arizona Agriculture, our monthly publication, and I always love to hear. He travels all over the country. We were just talking before the show, Danny. I think you flew back on Tuesday. I don't know what your Wednesday was like, and then this morning you had a round table. So you're just gunning and going all the time. And in fact, you kind of alluded to that when in this introduction part of today, but give us like a day-to-day of what it's like working for American Farm Bureau Federation as an economist, and then some of the areas of expertise or areas that you specialize in as an economist for American.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every day is different at Farm Bureau. Obviously, first and foremost, we're reacting to what's happening on the Hill. So we have our policy at American Farm Bureau that our lobbyists use as their directives to lobby for and against, and we are there to support them partly as economists. So, keeping track of any legislation that's coming out, writing letters and doing the economic analysis surrounding letters. So just recently, we put out this morning, actually, a letter asking for economic assistance from the administration. We do background analysis looking at, specialty crop, row crop losses. So at any one point in time, we're doing a number of our market intel analyses in the background. That's base number one. If we're not working on anything else, we're working on one of these market intel analyses, which run the gambit bit of issues. And then things will pop up during the day that could hijack how much time we spend on those market intel. So media interviews or stakeholder meetings with other industry partners in the city, a call with a state farm bureau. Some of our state farm bureaus don't have as many resources, so they might lean on us for statistics when they work on state level issues. One-off calls with other economists around town. The day can change quickly, and then as you mentioned, the travel part of the week we could be in one side of the country, the other side of the other part of the week we could be in another side of the country. In one hand, doing a presentation on dairy economics, on another, maybe we're talking about foreign ownership of ag land. My issue areas, I cover dairy pricing and policy economics for the team, especially crop markets, transportation, and infrastructure. I also get a lot of filler issues. So when I joined Farm Bureau, all the big main issues aside from dairy were already kind of taken by an existing economist. So I got to come in and take all these kind of fun issues that pop up intermittently. And that includes things like wildlife damage, so feral hogs, predator issues, as you all are too familiar with out on the west side of the country, public lands, foreign ownership, as I mentioned. So a lot of these filler issues as well.
Wow. That is the other reason, Tammy, that I brought Danny Munch here, because he does pay attention to what's going on in the dairy market. And speaking of those market intel reports that all of the economists at American have to be committed to writing, Danny, you don't know this yet, but I'm quoting you from another one of your market intels for an upcoming issue of Arizona Agriculture. But it's just a huge resource for our farmers and ranchers specifically, and then across the general ag industry and our stakeholders. I don't think we'd understand some of the things that we now understand when it comes to economics, thanks to people like Danny.
Well, and in a very, very important area, and hence the reason you're probably speaking so much and traveling so much. And, to that point, I know that in some of your talks, you've talked about the tale of two farm economies. Could you talk to us a little bit about the unevenness and what you mean by that?
Yeah, and that's something, it's shifted a little bit, but still pretty present in the current ag economy, where we're comparing and contrasting the livestock industry and how well it's doing with the crop sector and how well it's doing. So the tale of two farm economies being that the crop sector is pretty much been in the hole for the past several years since our 2022 highs when we had record crop prices across many of our categories, while on the other side of the equation, beef markets are really lifting up the livestock side of the equation. So our cattle producers generally doing pretty well. Much more recently, though, we've started to see some of the other livestock sectors like dairy forecasts for milk prices actually go down. So we see estimates for this year quite a bit lower than last year for dairy receipts. And then other livestock sectors like eggs and pork down as well. So beef really is leading the share of income coming in on the livestock side and making them seem a little bit shinier and better off than the crop side of the equation. But that's really what we're looking at two tails of two tails of the farm economy.
Yes. The other thing that I wanted to know about that you have brought up more than once, whether you're speaking or in your writing, and then the USDA, they recently projected that net farm income could stay under pressure through the entire year. And this is even with some slight improvements maybe later on in the year. So, what are the biggest factors? Some of them are obvious. We may know them, but I want to hear this from you. What are some of the biggest factors driving this?
Yeah, and sort of zoom out a little bit first, USDA releases a net farm income forecast 3 times a year. Usually it's for the first time in February, and then they'll update it in September and December. Now, at the end of 2025, we had as you all remember, a long government shutdown, and they didn't give us that December update. So we were working with a September number that for 2025 was $183 billion, which $180 billion, excuse me, which is a pretty strong number. When we look back to 2022, that was a record net farm income year, it was $182 billion. So just a bit lower than that. In the most recent February update, which was the latest we have since September of last year, they reduced that $180 billion number down to $153 billion. So over a $25 billion drop from their original estimation. And for 2026, we expect that to go down by another $1 billion to $152 billion. So Much more aligned with what agricultural economists were looking at for the farm economy last year. Some of that was because government payments that they estimated that were going to go out last year are actually estimated to go out this year. A lot of delays in program funding, disaster assistance that was supposed to go out. But a big piece of the equation is production expenses, right? Production expenses are going up each and every year across most of our major categories and are outpacing any of the prices that our farmers and ranchers are seeing. So, for instance, marketing, transportation, interest expenses, labor, those are all at record levels. So, biting away at the bottom line for our producers, and in many cases, especially for our crop growers, creating losses on the economic side.
It's really tough when you look at some of these reports. And speaking of reports with the USDA, at the roundtable today, I got the vibe that they're really working on, improving those reports. And were you encouraged by today's roundtable?
Yeah, and I mean, USDA put out a request for information, and that's what Julie is speaking about, a request for information from basically everyone that uses USDA data. And we're one of the biggest consumers, I would say, at Farm Bureau. Our team relies on all of that data to do any of the analysis we do. Now, it is on all these different government websites, and sometimes they're on PDF reports. Sometimes you can download them as an Excel file. Sometimes you don't even know the data exists. So there's a lot that can be improved, and it's good to see that USDA is trying to put some outreach out there and figure out what can be approved, what new data can we access, how can we loop in things like artificial intelligence to make things a little bit easier to access. So I was, very positive with how USDA spoke with us this morning, and the outlook for more data availability and more streamlined access to these data products is super good news for us.
Yeah, that's the way I felt
Yeah,
about it.
that's great to hear because
Yeah.
there is so much data out there, and it does take a long time to compile it and get it out there. So it usually lags behind a bit.
Well, I give up sometimes and I just go to American Farm Bureau Federation's economist team and I say, Danny, Faith, help me. Where is this and or what does it mean?
I was just saying, we often feel bad because the USDA economists take all this time putting this data into these large data sets, but they don't actually get to analyze it that much and push it out there. So we get to do that, and it's like, all right, we're getting some of the media coverage that a lot of their data work is doing.
Yeah, and I know you did mention dairy prices, milk prices being down for the farmers. Um, Talk to us a little bit about where you see that going over the next 6 months, a year. I mean, we're seeing whole milk have a resurgence. Over 50% of consumers are buying whole milk over the other fat levels, and we're seeing protein having a real heyday. Everybody's trying to get more protein. Requirements for protein have increased. I mean, all the things that are in milk are going up and consumers are buying more of, and yet we still are not seeing these dairy prices turning around.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important conversation to have on the supply side, and that's really what's causing these price drops. It's because dairy farmers have also become beef farmers, right? We have these very high premiums out there for calves, for really any sort of hooved animal that has meat on it, because of how high beef prices are. And because of that, dairy farmers are starting to breed for beef crosses. We can see that over 75, over 80% of dairy farmers are using beef semen in their herd management practices, and trying to use are breeding their milk cows with beef semen to get these crosses that have better marbling, better feed conversion ratios. The packers like them better when they're processing them. They're just bigger animals that bring better returns for dairy farmers. And what analysts have found is between dairy farmers are receiving between $4 to $5 a hundredweight in milk equivalent because of these beef crosses. Now the problem with it is on the milk supply side is dairy farmers are not culling milk cows that they normally would have culled. Instead, they're keeping them in production another year. So they're breeding them for a beef cross, and those milk cows are remaining in milk production. So we actually have the highest milk cow inventory since 1993. And that's contributing to record milk production in the United States. And we also have record milk production abroad. Um, the other side of the equation, though, here is that because they're breeding for beef crosses and not for milk replacements, we have the lowest milk replacements since 1978. So there is going to be a point where we might not have the milk replacements we need to immediately bolster up milk production because those cows are being bred for beef crosses. So in the short term, I continue to expect that excess milk production will push down prices. but there might be a point, 2, 3 years out where you might have more correction depending on how the dairy industry responds. On the demand side of the equation, yeah, I mean, people are looking for high protein, high nutrient products. Part of this, I mean, we look at the new food pyramid that was released with milk and meat right up top. That's good to see. We got whole milk for healthy kids across the finish line. Hopefully, that will help to make long term milk drinkers out of kids. So those are good signs. But at the end of the day, it's not enough to suck up the excess supply. And even with our low milk prices, that's set us up well internationally. Our cheese and butter are much lower price than Europe and New Zealand. And we actually had, with all discussion of trade issues, we had record dairy exports last year. And even with that, we still see these dairy price declines. So some of these herd management decisions, we're seeing some good signs on the demand side, but just not able to push those prices high enough for our guys.
And if I heard it right, because they're not always breeding for the next generation of dairy cows, there is going to be a shortage and milk prices will probably go up, right? Because of supply and demand.
Well, and it's funny because it really depends who you talk to. I talk to some dairy farmers out west, the guys with more cows, and they're not too worried about supply correction anytime soon. They say they can, cull 10% of their herd and have the same sort of output. I would say I'm a little bit more that there is going to be some sort of correction. I don't know how big it will be, but I don't see if these numbers sustain in terms of the minimal amount of calves that are replacements that we have. I don't see a situation where the market's going to be able to keep the sustained level of milk production increases we've seen with those herd dynamics. So I'm a little bit more skeptical.
Let's talk about off farm income. I think all of us, I know in my own family, either another spouse has a off farm job or the farmer also is full time doing XYZ. My dad did that. He worked for the University of Arizona, one of the research farms, but he also ran the family farm. And there's reasons for that off farm income, and it's only obvious. These input costs you alluded to earlier, Danny, they've gone higher. The fertilizer, all the inputs, everything it takes for the farmer and the rancher to do business has gone up while commodity prices
The
and
perfect storm,
yeah, the
right?
perfect storm, why the commodity prices have gone down. Talk about that that environment and what's changed and or how's it moving. What's your take on this off farm income?
Yeah, and this is a piece of the conversation that I think has often been left out because, over time I present at all these different farmer events, and I get the question, well, you keep saying doom and gloom, but each year there's still enough farmers in this room to come and listen to you. And the question and what I like to show them is this off-farm income piece. So I mentioned that, we're forecasted 153 billion this year for net farm income. Now that number is really going to be skewed towards the farms that contribute most to production. So it's really measuring the health of your biggest contributors. The metric I like to look at is median farm related income and median off farm income. When you look at the median, so the point where half earn more and half earn less, farmers in 2026 are expected to lose over $1,100. So that means more than half of farmers are expected to have a loss of more than $1,100. Now, on the off farm income side, we expect to see over $90,000 in off farm income. And what we find is in 2023, which is one of our latest data points, 77% of all household income on a farm operation is coming from off farm sources. So we have this situation where because commodity prices are so low and have been so low and unpredictable, farmers in the United States have diversified their household revenue by taking on off-farm positions to really stabilize their family income. How has it changed? Well, one of the things that we have seen changed over time, and off-farm income has been really important even over the last 50 years for our farmers and ranchers. But because there's less and less people living in rural America, farmers are having to travel farther and farther away to access these off-farm jobs. So as you see consolidation, as you see loss of population, those off-farm opportunities shrink. Back in 2020, 2000, it was about 50% of people, of commuters left their home county to access jobs. Now we're up over 62%. So that number is getting higher and higher, people having to travel farther and farther away to access jobs. Another thing we look at is, why are people having these off-farm positions? And as you allude to, things like retirement benefits, things like healthcare, those are things that farming and being a sole proprietor or partnership can't always offer that at a low cost rate. So having a spouse who's a teacher or who might be a crop insurance agent themselves, that might bring some of those benefits to the operation.
Boy, the one thing that you identified as a change is that for the second job that someone has off the farm, they have to travel further. Dad had a great situation because his farm was adjacent to the University of Arizona's experiment farm. So he just hopped in the truck and it was a hop, skip, and a jump away. So that's a huge contrast to what some of our farm families are experiencing today. And I have to ask one other question, not on your list. What's keeping us in farming then? I mean, my heartstrings are just really being tugged on right now because I'm thinking this is tough. They see it's not penciling out on the farm. Okay, we need a second job, or the spouse needs to go to work for that kind of stabilization of the home. When you talk, because you're traveling so much, Danny, any vibes, any insights on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a cultural thing, right? Our farmers and ranchers love to steward the land. It's their passion. They want to continue doing it. And in a lot of situations, we see, especially on the beginning farmer front, where a beginning farmer is going to get their college degree, get a job, and have a stable income, and then venture back into farming, maybe if their family did it, or get into if they didn't do it. So they're looking at sort of their operational and revenue risk a little bit differently, where they're trying to balance both of these to support themselves. Now, there are a lot of farmers that have been able to take advantage of certain geographic or consumer trends and still be able to be just farmers, right? Where I grew up in Connecticut, one of the nice things about the Northeast is most farmers are within an hour or less of a metropolitan region of over 100,000 people. You have a lot more people with higher expendable income. So we have dairy farms out there that are very small. And when I say very, 40 to 60 Jersey cows, they're making cheese, premium cheeses, and they're doing well. So you have sort of the situation where if you're able to leverage certain consumer dynamics that exist in your area and do value add, diversify your farm income, you might be able to make ends meet just from the farming side. Now, the part where it's become much more complex is if you are selling a product that's going into the global market and is, you know, a homogeneous product. So what I mean by that is milk produced in Arizona is pretty similar to the milk produced in Wisconsin, is pretty similar to the milk produced in New Zealand and European Union. If that's just going into the general supply, you are competing with everyone else who's also producing that same product. So in these non differentiated product groups, these your grain markets, livestock markets, you're much
Cotton?
more cotton. You're much more exposed to this global risk. And those are the areas where there's a lot of concern right now, and where we really need to figure out how we can find more value in the supply chain to bring back more value to our farmers and ranchers in the U.S.
You bring up a really good point, though, about the diversification. I mean, I think the newer age, really, that diversification is key. And whether it's making cheese or whether it's having a second job or just finding out or having a digester on your dairy that's generating energy, that diversification seems to be something that's becoming more and more necessary. And as you mentioned earlier, with dairy, there are a lot of dairy farmers now that are breeding to get beef out of the dairy as well. Do you see any kind of ripple effect, though, from some of these things? Do you think that's going to send the price of beef down a little bit, or is there other implications by some of this crossing over into other territories, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, hedging your risk by adding more revenue streams, I don't think is ever really a bad thing. Obviously, sometimes those additional revenue streams might not always pan out. And if you have multiple different types, if you have diversification, as it implies, there are going to be years where some are good and some are bad. So you're going to have to deal with that regardless. On the sort of beef herd front, a lot of folks, we have the smallest beef cattle herd since in 70 plus years. And folks were at the early beginning of the year, were expecting maybe by 2028, we might be able to see some expansion in our cattle herd. And I'm pretty bearish on that happening. Why am I bearish on that happening? Well, first and foremost, we have the screwworm issue in
Mm.
Mexico that hasn't made it to the U.S. Officially yet, but is about 70 miles outside the border. They're releasing sterile flies, but we have our live cattle imports shut down to sort of prevent any movement of that disease and pest across the border. So we have sort of a cap on supply from the south. And then if we're looking at some of our snowpack levels, especially out where you guys are out west, in many cases, a big portion of that region is below 50% of average snowpack. So we're looking at a surface water year, forage condition year that's looking pretty abysmal going into the year. So I'm thinking back to 2022, 2023, those really bad drought years when we saw a lot of Western producers liquidate their cattle, make those emotional decisions to get rid of genetics they worked on for years and years and years. That might be a very real possibility again in certain places this year. So I don't love to say that, but the idea that our cattle herd is going to recover anytime soon, I don't see that happening. Now, yes, the dairy side of the equation might help that. There are a lot of dairy cows out there, and if we continue to breed for those, that continues to add that supply, but it's never going to really be able to take over that expansion that we need to lower prices. And on the demand front, it's sustained. I mean, Americans are buying beef no matter what price it is, and part of that might be this gear towards high protein, nutrient dense food items. We hear all about GLP-1s and how people are eating less in total, less volume, but need very small, high protein rich food items. So that's pushing up beef demand even higher and higher, even with these prices.
And I just saw a statistic yesterday, actually, that those GLP-1s, especially with them going into pill form rather than shots, are going to continue to be on the rise for the next couple of years.
Oh, wow.
So,
Interesting.
meaning everybody's going to need high quality protein and they're eating less. So it could continue to escalate.
Yes. So, Danny, American Farm Bureau Federation team might get after me if I didn't ask you a trade question. It's shameful to not ask a trade question of a agricultural economist. So, what's the story on trade from your perspective and what you're seeing and the analytics that you're studying? Does it get better in 2026? Where are we going? We hear those stories of we lost some of China's business to Brazil. Some farmers are convinced it will never come back. What are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of all over the place, and we kind of have to take each each subject individually. But some of the main concepts I'm thinking about when I think about trade, foreign buyers want consistency and reliability in whoever they purchase from, and so a country doesn't like uncertainty in their partnerships, and that's one of the problems that I've seen. Obviously, when talking about putting tariffs on, taking tariffs off, that sort of situation adds uncertainty, and buyers sometimes look elsewhere for that product. And you mentioned Brazil. That's one of the main competitors we've had, in the recent years, and they're going to continue to expand and only be more formidable of a competitor. A lot of Americans don't realize, but if you overlapped Brazil over the United States, it would reach from Edmonton, Canada, all the way down to Mexico City. It is a big country, and their main grain producing region, Mato Grosso, is about 6 times the size of Illinois. Now, keep in mind, because of their climate, they can produce 2 to 3 crops a year. So we can produce one. Their infrastructure way behind us. They don't have the inland waterway system we do. They don't have the railway system we do. Now, they do have some ports that already rank higher than American ports in terms of efficiency. They continue to see investment from places like China in their infrastructure. So if they're already producing more soybeans than us, they're on track to produce more beef than us soon. How formidable of a competitor, and they have much less regulatory pressure and much lower labor costs. How formidable of a competitor are they going to be into the future? So that's a concern I have. We start to see partners that traditionally bought from us, they do go to other nations. We see this especially in the produce space as well, in the United States, where we see a lot of our production moving over borders. Some of it's for seasonality, but a lot of it's just the production costs and regulatory pressure. It will take time. The USA still has the best quality, and I think that's something we can lean in on. But that is something that we're worried about. Other things in trade, Obviously, we see a lot of frameworks announced by the Trump administration, and those are all in the positive direction, right? We like to see trade deals. What we want to see, though, is those cross the finish line and start to see the fruits of that labor. There's also a number of non-tariff related barriers we continue to work on. Things like using certain terms like Parmesan, which Europe is trying to be very protective over where these terms can originate from, sort of like tequila can only be from Mexico and you have to call it agave if it comes from another place. But allowing us to still utilize those terms is something we're pursuing. But so much happening in trade, cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to access some of these growing markets. And then you have to even look more broadly from a macro perspective. China's population's on the decline, or expected to decline the next 50 100 years quite substantially. So we're going to have to shift gears and look at places like Southeast Asia, sub-Saharan Africa, where those economies are developing. They're going to have more high protein demand, and that's where really we can really step in and create and provide some of our high quality product. And it's all our products too, right? There's very high quality aquaculture production that's happening in Africa, and our soybeans can be used in feed on those operations. So much is opportunity for us. But I always like to say there's always more mouths. There's more mouths outside the United States than there are inside the United States. So we really have to leverage that.
Tammy, I don't know if you remember when we had Paul Brierly on, and he's like a Danny Munch. He goes all over. Paul Brierly with the Arizona Department of Agriculture, and he did say some of these international trade partners that he's connected with, they really like American product, and they like American ag products. So he was very encouraged by some of those discussions with international trade representatives, which I'm encouraged about too, because quality is one of the things that we can stand on with our agriculture here in America.
Well, and it's all important. I mean, primarily our product stays in the U.S. for the most part, but you've got to have that extra piece going to export to really make sure it's all utilized and prices stay stable and farmers have a place for their product to go. I mean, both of them are important.
Do I not remember that in dairy, your powdered milk is very popular to be exported to certain countries?
Yes, various forms of powdered products are exported to places all over the world.
Okay.
And again, we were talking about the high quality protein. Protein is in demand everywhere, so that's another big plus for dairy.
Yeah.
Internally, though, I know you were talking about transportation in Brazil and ports, but transportation disruptions on the other side of things can be a real pain for farmers. I mean, and something out of their control. Do you see any areas of concern that you're monitoring right now in terms of transportation disruptions?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's probably a big one that just popped into everybody's brain, but there's a little conflict happening over by Iran.
Yeah.
But about 20% of the world's petroleum comes out of that region, and a substantial amount of the inputs that we use for fertilizer production around the country. The United States does get a lot of its fertilizer from domestically, but the prices are set on global markets. So when other countries aren't getting the fertilizer that they need because of transportation disruptions, because of these pathways being shut down, that's boosting up prices for our producers. And we've already seen per ton costs for all different kinds of fertilizer jump up quite substantially. And every boat that's not able to make it from one spot to another spot is a boat that can't be where it's supposed to be in a few weeks. So the flexibility, the nimbleness of the supply chain breaks down. And we saw this around COVID-19 when there was all those supply issues and the congestion at ports. So any long-term situation that we have in the Middle East is going to start to tighten up some of our supply. You're going to have a more flexible system. And actually, one of the reasons why today or yesterday maybe President Trump announced the exempting boats from the Jones Act, which historically, if a boat comes from another foreign country and it comes to U.S. port and then leaves and goes back to another country, that can be an international boat. But if it goes, say, to New York and then wants to go down to other ports to drop off cargo and pick up cargo, it has to be a U.S. boat. And there's a very limited quantity of U.S. boats out there. So every so often, the president will exempt and relieve that law from effect, so that you can provide a little bit more flexibility to the waterway system and the ocean export system. So we're glad to see some of those things that we put in a letter to President Trump happen. And then, even more close to home, there's consolidation that's proposed in the transportation industry, the Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern merger, which would bring together, two of the Class 1 railroads and create one end-to-end railroad. We have a lot of concerns about that at Farm Bureau, right? The proponents for it say there's going to be efficiency gains, but in historical mergers, all we've seen is that prices increase for farmers. They are mostly captive shippers, meaning they can't ship through any other alternative. They have to accept whatever transportation cost is given to them by the railroad, or they don't get to ship their product. And when you reduce competition, you're more likely to use captive shippers to cover more of your costs, especially a cost like an $85 billion merger. So our delegates, we formally oppose the Union Pacific merger. We think it would make our supply chain more susceptible to national security risk too, right? If you combine two companies that used to be separate under one system, now that's more of a potential risk if there's a national security threat, because now one national security threat can impact a coast-to-coast railroad instead of having different systems. So just some other thoughts in that area.
I'm glad you brought up the Jones Act, because if you hadn't, I was going to ask you about it, and that is really important and really critical. And one of the things that it did in this conflict that's going on, it's going to allow more foreign ships to bring some of that fertilizer that we're so in need of in spring planting. Some of our farmers in the Midwest are already planting for spring. So without the inputs that they need, even though the frustrating thing is that they're higher today, but they're ready to plant. They've penciled it out. They've got a season, and they can't call up Mother Nature and say, hey, can you slow down?
Well, and ultimately, I mean, it trickles down when you connect the dots back to the consumer.
Right.
Because if you can't resolve the issues and they can't plant, then there's going to be less food available, then it's going to be higher prices. So it all eventually trickles down to the consumer. So it's great that so many things are being put into place to try to minimize any of these disruptions.
And speaking of disruptions, the flip side of it is maybe some of the infrastructure issues that you just answered for Tammy's question. But what about these national or natural disasters? And we still have drought in the West. And, I know you guys are always tracking those issues too. Any things to anticipate in 2026? We know we have drought out West, but what does all this mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The infrastructure piece of the puzzle, we're always trying to find ways to improve all sorts of different infrastructure attributes, from broadband to, rural highways. We still have a lot of money that has to go out under the bipartisan infrastructure deal from a few years back. I think it was only last year that some of the broadband money was, going through states through different grants. So there's still a lot of money and improvements that have to be made. Out west, obviously, Colorado River Basin states still haven't really come to an agreement on water use. I'm not an expert in the policy, but a substantial amount of our food, especially fresh produce, comes from water from that river. So we really need to make sure that agriculture has a continued voice in those conversations, and make sure that any deal that is struck between these states values agriculture at the top of that list. Because without it, we're going to move a big part of our production over borders overseas, and then if there's that poses a national security risk. So there's a lot you could say about infrastructure, but those are just some top line thoughts.
And I know we've been talking a lot about some of the challenges, but as far as on the bright side, what are some of the bright lights you're seeing, bright spots in the future?
The amount of innovation that's happening in agriculture, and the amount of young people that are getting into agriculture from even more urban places. And I'll give a little bit of personal story. I didn't grow up on a farm. My parents actually grew up in New York City in the Bronx. They moved to Connecticut before I was born, and there was a small beef farmer down the road from me. And when I say small, in Connecticut, it's like 13 head of cattle. She also did some pigs and honey and things of that nature, mixed livestock operation. But I went down there because I loved the animals, and I would work and play with the animals. And she was a 4-H leader. So she sucked me into 4-H. I started showing beef cows and chickens, and then I never left it. So I know there's so many people. I just left the YFNR conference in Portland, Oregon over the weekend. There's so many young people who don't have a traditional ag background, but have really been exposed to agriculture in a way where they want to make long-term careers. And because of their diverse backgrounds, they're bringing in perspectives that I think will help us connect with consumers in a way where there will be much more value added in the supply chain for farmers in the future, right? We always talk about the farmer food dollar, and I'm probably one of the few economists that doesn't like that metric. You could say 9 cents of the dollar goes back to the farmer, but obviously that's going to vary drastically depending on that product and how much value the supply chain adds to it. So if you're producing direct to market lettuce, the farmer's going to receive a much higher share than if you're going to, a sugar producer that ends up in a candy bar or something. It's going to be much smaller. And why I'm telling you this is because that whole extra piece of the dollar, there's a whole piece of the value chain that I think farmers can also get value out of if we know how to access it. There's also new uses of ag products that can be utilized. I talked earlier, 2 weeks ago, we had a call with folks that are looking at maritime fuel and using renewable energy and even animal waste and methane, the methane production from dairy cows, and trying to get that into maritime fuel because you can just drop that in and there's already uses there. Bioplastics is something that we're looking at, and other novel food uses too. So I think there's so much opportunity to build domestic demand, to build foreign demand. There's a lot of innovation happening. Artificial intelligence, while daunting and while there is issues posed with data centers and all that issues, it will help in leaps and bounds in the genetic space, creating even more resilient crop varieties, more drought resistant crops, better nutrition for our animals. So I do see I'm always optimistic about agriculture. I'm optimistic about the future generation, and there is a lot of opportunities out there. We just have to make sure the producers and farmers and ranchers we have today can be bridged and support that new generation in the future.
Well, you're proof of the pudding. Your parents didn't farm, but down the road was a farmer, and she was a 4-H leader, and look what happened to you. Now you're a national economist for American Farm Bureau Federation. So you're proof of the pudding. And I like that optimism. And it's important that we realize that there are a lot of diverse opportunities. I'm hoping that's, unless you've already written it or the team, and I haven't caught it, but you guys definitely need to write an article about all of the other production opportunity products that are out there, value added products and things that we never thought of before because of technology. And by the way, in logistics and transportation, they're really incorporating the AI and also blockchain. And so it's, and the whole point is for speed, efficiency, and to try to avoid waste. So a lot of exciting things are happening, and I cheer you on in being able to report that, Danny. So for the everyday, last question, for the everyday consumer, we've covered a lot of things in this last hour, and fascinating and hopeful things, while there are also big challenges. But what are your takeaways for our listeners that that aren't on the farm, but they need to understand what's going on? I mean, what's your insights?
One of the problems that we have right now is just information overload. I mean, I go home, I want to watch a TV show, I start looking and then I shut it off because I'm like, I don't know what to choose. There's so much out there. We don't know what we will like. We don't know really what to believe. We don't know what to hear. And this is something I think farmers are getting a lot better at, but figuring out what the right perspective on a lot of our agriculture issues is, and figuring out what the right sources are. And at the end of the day, that's going to be our farmers and ranchers directly, right? Not going through a social media platform that, somebody reporting on something else, reporting on something else, reporting on something else, directly working with farmers and ranchers who are on the ground growing our food, fiber, and fuel. So, I always tell consumers, if they're confused about something, go out there, go out, take a drive, go to your local communities and start asking questions, because most of our folks are very happy to show people what they do. And something that I often bring up that, I always like to give farmers this advice too is farmers are doing the jobs that most people wouldn't like to do, the bad part of the job. We don't want to do any of that heavy lifting or dirty work that they love to do, and it's part of their passion. But the part of the equation that farmers don't love to do and they need to do a little bit more is that people side of the equation, and telling their story. And I know that they don't always want to do that, but it's going to become integral as we have to go through this information overload and help shine this correct information. And I will say that I think we've gotten better. There are a number of folks out there, especially at the Young Farmer and Rancher Conference, who are building a following, who we're starting to see, I think, more and more videos that are accurately representing agriculture and the profound science behind agriculture. So really just go out there, meet with the farmers and ranchers who produce your food, make those connections. And when you have a question, call them up, send them a text, find them on Facebook. Don't read an article you found twice hand removed and make your decisions based on that.
And by the way, one of the easiest ways to meet a farmer is at the farmers markets. If you find one in your area, and they're easy to find on fillyourplate.org because we have a searchable database. Also, farms that you can visit, and on fillyourplate.org we have a searchable database.
Good points. Good way to find a farmer.
Yeah, a searchable database that allows you to pick. Like if you're going to be in the Cochise County area, there's like a handful of farms that people can visit. And that's to Danny's main point, that you've got to talk to the farmer, find out from his or her perspective what's real that's happening on boots on the ground. Danny, thank you so much. This has been so fascinating. I absolutely want to have you back again, maybe in a year, and we can kind of say, okay, this is what happened in 2026, and yay, 2027 is here. But thanks so much for all you do. Tell the gang at American hello. I so appreciate them.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you so much. I always tell people, like, I've never been west of Texas before Farm Bureau, and now I've been to every I've been to every state now, but every Western state, and it's just to a Northeasterner going out west and seeing the expansiveness and seeing that agriculture is just amazing. So I'm so glad I get to work on the issues that affect Arizona and continue to be able to work with y'all. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.